My name is Joyce, and at 58, I never imagined my own daughter would treat me like a tenant in the home I owned for 30 years. After my husband died, I sacrificed everything for Maggie, working double shifts as a nurse to give her the best life possible. When she and her husband hit financial troubles, I welcomed them into my home with open arms. I never expected gratitude, but I certainly didn't expect what happened next. The words still echo in my mind. "Pay the rent or get out," she screamed at me. Before I share how my own daughter treated me like a stranger, tell me where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you love. The ending of this story might give you the courage you need right now. Life has a way of testing us in ways we never anticipate. I became a widow at 32 when my husband David suffered a sudden heart attack. One moment we were planning our summer vacation, and the next, I was planning his funeral. Our daughter Maggie was only 6 years old at the time, too young to fully comprehend the permanence of her father's absence, but old enough to feel the crushing weight of his loss. Those early years were a blur of grief and determination. I would often find myself sitting at our kitchen table after Maggie had gone to bed, surrounded by bills and budget spreadsheets, wondering how I would manage on my own. David had some life insurance, thank goodness, but it wouldn't last forever. I had my nursing career, but supporting a child in a single-income household meant I needed to work extra shifts to keep us afloat. Despite the exhaustion, Maggie and I had a beautiful relationship during her childhood years. She was my anchor, the reason I got out of bed on the hardest days. Her smile, so much like her father's, kept me going when I wanted to collapse from exhaustion. I would come home from a 12-hour shift at the hospital, and she would be waiting with a crayon drawing or a story about her day at school. "Mommy, I saved you a cookie from lunch because I know chocolate makes you happy," she would say, pulling a slightly squashed cookie from her backpack. Those small moments of pure love made every sacrifice worthwhile. And there were many sacrifices. I postponed dating, turning down several potential relationships because the men couldn't understand why my daughter would always come first. My own parents lived across the country in Florida, so I relied heavily on our neighborhood support system and the parents of Maggie's friends when I needed childcare for my night shifts. I set aside every spare dollar for Maggie's college fund, knowing that education would be her pathway to opportunities I never had. My own social life dwindled to occasional coffee dates with fellow nurses and the rare movie night with my best friend Sandra. Shopping for myself became an afterthought. I wore the same practical shoes and scrubs for years while making sure Maggie had everything she needed for school and social activities. Even as a child, Maggie occasionally showed signs of entitlement that worried me. When her friends got the newest toys or electronics, she couldn't understand why we had to wait for sales or birthdays. I tried to teach her the value of money and the difference between wants and needs, but it was difficult competing with the materialistic influences all around us. "But Jennifer's parents got her the new phone, and they're not even rich," she would argue, her lower lip protruding in a practiced pout. "We have different priorities, sweetie," I would explain patiently. "We're saving for your future for college. That's more important than having the newest phone right now." Despite these occasional conflicts, we shared many special moments that strengthened our bond. Every Sunday was our baking day, a tradition that started when Maggie was 7. We would turn the kitchen into a flour-dusted wonderland, creating cookies, cakes, and bread that filled our home with warmth and delicious aromas. During summer breaks, I would save up my vacation days for mother-daughter road trips, driving up the coast to explore small towns and beaches, staying in modest motels, but creating priceless memories. The house itself held tremendous significance for us. It was a 4-bedroom craftsman-style home that had belonged to David's parents. When David died, they offered to sell it to me at a reduced price, wanting to keep their son's family in a home filled with happy memories. I used part of the life insurance money for the down payment, and over the years, I poured my heart into maintaining it even when money was tight. It was a beautiful house with hardwood floors, a wraparound porch, and the kind of architectural details you don't find in newer homes. Over the decades, our neighborhood transformed from a working-class area to one of the most desirable districts in Portland, with property values skyrocketing as young professionals and wealthy families discovered its charm. What had been a stretch for me to afford in the beginning had, unbeknownst to me at the time, become quite valuable. But to me, the true value of the house was emotional, not financial. It was where David and I had started our family, where his presence lingered in the workshop he'd built in the garage, and the tree swing he'd hung for Maggie. Every corner held memories, both painful and precious. I couldn't imagine living anywhere else. As Maggie entered her teenage years, our relationship began to shift in subtle ways. The sweet little girl who made me handmade birthday cards grew into a teenager who compared our lifestyle unfavorably to her wealthier friends. Portland's increasing affluence meant that many of Maggie's classmates came from much more privileged backgrounds than ours. "Mom, why can't we renovate the kitchen like Stephanie's parents did? Our house looks so outdated," she would complain, seemingly blind to the charm that others saw in our vintage home. "A new kitchen won't make our food taste better or our conversations more meaningful." I would respond, trying to refocus her on what truly mattered, but I worried that the gap between her desires and our reality would drive a wedge between us. I worked even harder, picking up additional shifts and doing private nursing on weekends to provide more of the material things she wanted. Looking back, perhaps this was my first mistake, trying to buy her happiness rather than helping her find contentment with what we had. Despite these challenges, I never stopped supporting her unconditionally. When she needed braces, I found a way to afford them. When she wanted to attend expensive summer camps to boost her college applications, I took out a small loan. My love for her knew no bounds, and I believed that one day, when she was older, she would understand the depth of my devotion and the reasons behind my choices. I just never imagined how wrong I would be. The trajectory of Maggie's life took a dramatic turn when she was accepted to Willamette University, a prestigious private college that cost nearly 4 times what the state university would have. I was bursting with pride at her accomplishment, but secretly terrified about how we would afford it. The college fund I had diligently built over the years would cover less than half the cost. "You deserve this opportunity," I told her, hiding my financial anxiety behind a smile. "We'll make it work." And somehow we did. I refinanced the house, took on additional weekend nursing jobs, and Maggie secured several scholarships. She also worked part-time in the campus library, which I hoped would instill a sense of financial responsibility. During her senior year, Maggie met Tyler Branson, a business major from Seattle, whose family owned a successful chain of furniture stores. They were instantly inseparable. Tyler was handsome and charming, with the kind of polished confidence that comes from never having worried about money. When he came to our home for Thanksgiving, I noticed how his eyes swept over our modest furnishings with barely concealed judgment. "Mrs. Winters, you have such a unique home," he commented, emphasizing the word in a way that made it clear it wasn't a compliment. "Have you thought about updating it? The property values in this neighborhood are exploding." "I value the memories more than the market value," I replied simply. Choosing to focus on his positive qualities instead, he was clearly intelligent, ambitious, and he made my daughter happy. The transformation in Maggie during her relationship with Tyler was remarkable. Her wardrobe shifted from practical college student attire to designer labels I knew she couldn't afford. Her language became peppered with references to exclusive restaurants and vacation spots. She began to adopt Tyler's habit of evaluating everything and everyone according to their financial worth. When they announced their engagement shortly after graduation, I was both happy for her and concerned about the values of the life they were building together. Their wedding plans quickly spiraled into an extravagant affair that would have made royalty blush. "Mom, we can't possibly have the reception at the community center," Maggie insisted when I gently suggested scaling back. "Everyone in Tyler's family would be mortified. His cousin got married at the Nines Hotel downtown, and we need something at least that nice." The wedding itself cost more than I had spent on her entire college education. I contributed every dollar I could, emptying my modest retirement account, to help give her the day she wanted. Tyler's parents covered most of the expenses, but made it clear they found my contribution inadequate. "Don't worry about it," Mrs. Branson told me with a patronizing pat on my arm. "We know you've done what you can with what you have." After the wedding, Maggie and Tyler leased an apartment in the Pearl District, one of Portland's most expensive neighborhoods. The rent alone was more than my monthly mortgage payment. They furnished it with high-end pieces from Tyler's family store and hosted dinner parties with wines that cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. Despite their appearance of affluence, I soon learned that their finances were built on quicksand. Tyler had secured a job at a financial services firm, but his starting salary couldn't support their lifestyle. Maggie found work at an upscale boutique, but spent most of her earnings on clothes and accessories she felt she needed for her new social circle. Credit card debt accumulated quickly. They leased luxury cars rather than purchasing more practical vehicles. When they spoke about their future, it was always in terms of what they would buy or where they would travel, never about building security or giving back to others. I continued to support Maggie emotionally and occasionally financially, sending care packages with homemade cookies and helping with unexpected expenses when they arose. Each time I visited their apartment, I noticed more new purchases and felt the growing distance between my values and the life my daughter had chosen. "Mom, you really should update your wardrobe," Maggie suggested during one visit, eyeing my comfortable jeans and cardigan. "I could help you pick out some things that would make you look more current." "I'm comfortable with who I am," I responded, trying not to feel hurt by the implication that I was somehow inadequate. Her criticism of my lifestyle became more frequent and pointed. She questioned why I still lived in the old house, why I drove a 10-year-old car, why I didn't travel more extensively or indulge in spa days and expensive restaurants. "You work so hard, Mom. Don't you want to enjoy life a little?" she would ask, seemingly unable to see that I found joy in simple pleasures like my garden, my book club, and my volunteer work at the hospital. Each comment stung, but I reminded myself that she was young and still finding her way. I continued to love her unconditionally, believing that life would eventually teach her the lessons I had failed to impart. Then the pandemic hit, bringing unexpected challenges to all of us. Tyler's firm downsized, and he was among the first let go his junior position, making him expendable. The boutique where Maggie worked closed temporarily, then permanently. Their income vanished almost overnight, but their expenses remained. I watched from a distance as their stress levels rose. Phone conversations with Maggie became tense, filled with complaints about their situation, and thinly veiled requests for financial help. I sent what I could, but as a nurse working through the pandemic, I was emotionally and physically drained myself. 3 months into the pandemic, Maggie called with a proposal that would change everything. "Mom, we've been thinking," she began, her voice carefully modulated to sound casual. "Since your house is so big and you're all alone there, what if we moved in temporarily? Just until Tyler finds another position. The lease on our apartment is up next month, and it would help us save money." My immediate instinct was to welcome them with open arms. Despite our differences, she was my daughter and she needed help. "Of course you can stay here," I said, without hesitation. "The upstairs has the guest bedroom and the old office. You can make that space your own." "That's perfect," Maggie replied, the relief in her voice palpable. "We'll contribute to utilities and groceries, of course. It'll be nice for you too, having company in that big house." I ended the call feeling hopeful. Perhaps this cohabitation would bring us closer help, bridge the gap that had developed between us. Perhaps Maggie would reconnect with the values of her childhood home and remember what truly matters in life. I spent the next week preparing for their arrival, clearing out closets, deep cleaning the guest rooms, stocking the pantry with their favorite foods. I was determined to make this work to support my daughter through this difficult time while respecting the adults they had become. As I changed the sheets on the guest bed, I allowed myself to imagine family dinners, movie nights, and maybe even reviving our Sunday baking tradition. I pictured myself helping Tyler with his job search, sharing my network of contacts from years in the healthcare industry. Little did I know that my hopes for a harmonious multi-generational household would soon be shattered in ways I could never have imagined. The first month of our new living arrangement was awkward, but manageable. Maggie and Tyler arrived with far more possessions than I had anticipated, requiring us to rearrange furniture and clear additional storage space. I tried to be accommodating, moving some of my own things to the basement to make room for their designer clothes and expensive electronics. "We won't be here long," Maggie assured me as I helped her unpack boxes in what had once been my home office. "Tyler has some promising leads already." I nodded encouragingly, determined to be a supportive mother and mother-in-law. "Take all the time you need. I'm just happy to have you home again." I went out of my way to make them comfortable cooking their favorite meals, respecting their privacy and trying to establish household routines that worked for everyone. I adjusted my schedule to use the kitchen early in the mornings before my hospital shifts, leaving them to sleep in and have the space to themselves during the day. But as weeks turned into months, Tyler's job search stretched longer than expected. The financial industry was contracting, and positions comparable to what he'd lost were scarce. His mood darkened with each rejection, and he began spending most days on the couch, scrolling through his phone and responding curtly when I attempted conversation. "Have you thought about looking in different industries?" I suggested gently one evening. "Your business degree could open doors in healthcare administration. I know some people at the hospital I could put you in touch with." "No offense, Joyce," he replied without looking up from his phone. "But I'm not interested in settling for some middle management job just to pay bills. I'm focused on opportunities with actual growth potential." I retreated, hurt by his dismissive tone, but trying to understand the blow his pride had suffered. Maggie, meanwhile, had found part-time work at a local boutique that had reopened, but her hours were limited, and her income barely covered her personal expenses. As the second month began, I noticed subtle changes in the power dynamic of the household. Maggie started rearranging furniture in the living room without asking, explaining that the new configuration made more sense for the space. She replaced family photos on the mantel with abstract art pieces she'd brought from their apartment, storing my treasured memories in a box she tucked away in a closet. "The house needed refreshing, Mom," she said, when she noticed my expression as I stared at the bare mantel where a photo of David and me on our wedding day had stood for decades. Those old pictures were collecting dust anyway. I felt a pang of resentment, but swallowed it, reminding myself that sharing a home meant compromises. Perhaps I was being too set in my ways, too attached to things rather than people. But the changes continued becoming more pronounced. Maggie began referring to the kitchen as her domain, suggesting meal plans and grocery lists without consulting me. Tyler claimed the living room as his workspace, making it uncomfortable for me to use that space during the day. They invited friends over without warning, leaving me to encounter strangers in my hallway when I returned from night shifts. Gradually, I found myself feeling like a guest in my own home, knocking on doors before entering rooms, apologizing for interrupting when I needed to use the kitchen. I retreated more and more to my bedroom, the one space that remained solely mine. though even that sanctuary was occasionally invaded when Maggie needed to borrow something from my closet or bathroom. My friend Sandra noticed the change in me during our weekly phone calls. "You don't sound like yourself, Joyce," she observed. "Is everything okay with the living arrangement?" "We're adjusting," I replied, reluctant to voice my concerns, even to my closest friend. It's natural to have some friction when adults share a space. "Adjusting doesn't mean you should be uncomfortable in your own home," Sandra said firmly. "Remember, you're doing them a favor, not the other way around." Her words lingered in my mind, especially when I discovered that despite our initial agreement, Maggie and Tyler hadn't been contributing to household expenses as promised. The utility bills had doubled with their constant use of electronics and long showers, and the grocery expenses had skyrocketed as they stocked the pantry with specialty items and ordered frequent takeout on my account. After carefully rehearsing what I would say, I broached the subject one evening when we were all sitting in the living room. "I wanted to talk about the household expenses." I began, keeping my tone light and non-accusatory. "The bills have gone up quite a bit with 3 adults in the house. I thought we could review the budget together and figure out a fair way to split things." Maggie's expression immediately hardened. "Mom, seriously? You know we're in a tough spot right now. The economy is terrible and we're barely making enough to cover our own expenses." "I understand that," I said gently, "but we had agreed you would contribute to utilities and groceries. I'm not asking for rent, just some help with the increased costs." "We buy groceries all the time," Tyler interjected, though I couldn't recall a single occasion when they had returned from the store with bags that weren't filled exclusively with their personal preferences. "And we're saving you from living alone during a pandemic," Maggie added, as if her presence was payment enough. "Isn't that worth something?" I backed down, not wanting to create conflict. "Of course it is. I love having you here. I just thought we should check in about the financial arrangements, that's all." The conversation ended there, but the tension lingered. I noticed Maggie and Tyler exchanging glances whenever I entered a room, as if I had interrupted private discussions about me. They began having whispered conversations that abruptly stopped when I appeared, fueling my growing sense of alienation. The physical transformation of the house accelerated. Maggie replaced the living room curtains I had sewn myself with expensive blackout drapes. Tyler mounted a massive television on the wall, drilling into plaster that had remained unblemished for decades. My collection of houseplants, lovingly tended for years, was moved to the basement where the lack of natural light caused them to wither. Most painfully, I discovered one day that many of my belongings had been relocated to the basement without my knowledge or consent. Family heirlooms books I was currently reading, even clothes from my dresser, had been boxed up to make room for their possessions. The guest room where they were staying had been completely transformed. The furniture rearranged, the walls adorned with their art, every trace of its previous identity erased. My emotional distress grew with each passing day. I found myself avoiding conflict by working longer hours at the hospital, volunteering for extra shifts just to escape the tension at home. The pandemic was raging and healthcare workers were stretched thin, so no one questioned my sudden availability. I would return home exhausted, sometimes sleeping in my scrubs because I was too tired to change, and too anxious about encountering Maggie or Tyler in the hallway to the bathroom. Sandra continued to express concern during our now daily phone calls, which I took in my car parked down the street from my house to ensure privacy. "Joyce, this isn't right," she insisted, after I confessed that I'd found my late husband's workshop tools boxed up in the garage to make room for Tyler's exercise equipment. "That's your house. You need to stand up for yourself." "They're going through a difficult time," I defended weakly. "I don't want to make things worse." "And what about you? Aren't you going through a difficult time too, being treated like an intruder in your own home?" Sandra's voice was gentle but firm. "Your kindness is being mistaken for weakness, and they're taking advantage of it." Deep down, I knew she was right. but the thought of confrontation terrified me. I had spent my entire adult life avoiding conflict, always being the peacekeeper, the one who compromised. And this was my daughter. How could I assert boundaries without damaging our already fragile relationship? The internal conflict ate away at me, wanting to help my daughter versus standing up for myself, wanting to maintain peace versus demanding respect, wanting to be a good mother versus being a doormat. I lost sleep, lost weight, lost my sense of security and belonging in the space that had been my sanctuary for 3 decades. As weeks turned into months, with no sign of Tyler finding employment or the situation improving, I realized something would have to change. I just never imagined it would happen in such a devastating way. The breaking point came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I had returned from a grueling 12-hour shift at the hospital, my mask lines still etched into my face, my body aching with the physical and emotional toll of caring for COVID patients. All I wanted was a hot shower and a few hours of uninterrupted sleep before my next shift. As I entered through the back door, hoping to slip upstairs unnoticed, I glanced into the garage through the kitchen window and noticed several boxes stacked near the trash cans. Something about them caught my attention, a familiar blue storage container that I recognized as the one containing the last of my husband's personal possessions. With rising dread, I went to investigate and found that indeed David's belongings, his journals, his favorite sweaters, that I still couldn't bear, to donate photos and mementos from our life together, had been boxed up and placed with items clearly designated for disposal. A yellow sticky note on top read, "Goodwill or trash," in Maggie's handwriting. The physical pain I felt was immediate and overwhelming, like a blow to my chest. These were the last tangible connections to the man I had loved, the father Maggie had lost too young. How could she discard them so callously without even consulting me? I carried the box back into the house, my hands trembling with emotion. Maggie was in the kitchen preparing what looked like an elaborate charcuterie board, Tyler lounging nearby, scrolling through his phone. "Maggie, what is this?" I asked, my voice unusually sharp as I placed the box on the counter. "Why are your father's things being thrown out?" She glanced up, seemingly annoyed by the interruption. "Oh, we're clearing space in the garage for Tyler's Peloton that's being delivered tomorrow. That stuff was just collecting dust." "That stuff," I repeated, my voice quivering, "is all I have left of your father. How could you make that decision without asking me?" "Mom, it's been over 20 years. Maggie sighed as if I were being unreasonable. "You need to move on. We need that space, and the house is too cluttered as it is." Too cluttered. I felt something break inside me, a dam of emotion finally giving way. "This is my home, Maggie. These are my memories, my choices. You're guests here, not the owners." Maggie's expression hardened. "Guests? We've been living here for months, making this place actually livable for once. Do you know how embarrassed I am when friends come over and see how outdated everything is? If you're embarrassed by my home, perhaps you shouldn't invite people over." I suggested, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Or better yet, perhaps you should find your own place to live." Tyler looked up from his phone, then his expression contemptuous. "You know we can't afford that right now. The housing market is insane." "That's not my responsibility," I said, surprising myself with my firmness. "What is my responsibility is protecting what matters to me, including your father's memory." "Oh, please!" Maggie rolled her eyes dramatically. "Dad wouldn't want you living like this, surrounded by dust and memories, letting the house fall apart around you." "Don't tell me what your father would want," I replied, anger now rising to match my hurt. "I knew him better than anyone, including you." The argument escalated quickly. Maggie's voice grew louder, her gestures more animated. She accused me of living in the past, of using their financial situation to control them, of never supporting her choices. Each accusation stung worse than the last, especially coming from the child I had sacrificed everything for. "If you can't adjust to us being here, maybe you should start paying rent." Maggie suddenly declared, the words hitting me like a physical slap. "Excuse me?" I was certain I had misheard. "You heard me?" Maggie continued, warming to this new idea. "We're making improvements to this place, bringing it into this century. If you want to keep your outdated stuff around and live in the past, maybe you should pay us for putting up with it." I stood frozen, trying to comprehend how we had arrived at this moment. "This is my house, Maggie. The mortgage is in my name. I've been paying for it for 30 years. And it would be worthless without the improvements we're making," Tyler chimed in, setting down his phone to join the attack. "You should be grateful we're here to take care of things you can't handle anymore." "Can't handle," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've been handling everything just fine for decades. I welcomed you into my home out of love, not because I needed caretakers." "Well, you're not acting very grateful," Maggie snapped. "All you do is complain about changes and expenses when we're the ones stuck living in this museum to Dad." The conversation spiraled further out of control, voices rising, accusations flying. I tried repeatedly to redirect, to find common ground, to appeal to the daughter I knew was still in there somewhere. But Maggie was too far gone in her anger and too convinced of her righteousness. And then it happened, the moment that would change everything. "Pay the rent or get out!" Maggie screamed, her face contorted with rage I had never seen before. "This is our home now, and you're just a guest who doesn't know when she's overstayed her welcome." The room fell silent after her outburst. Tyler looked almost as shocked as I felt, though there was a hint of satisfaction in his expression too. Maggie stood breathing heavily, her hands clenched at her sides. I didn't say another word. With a calmness that surprised even me, I walked upstairs to my bedroom, pulled a small overnight bag from my closet, and methodically packed essentials for a few days away. I moved through the house like a ghost, collecting my medication, my phone charger, a framed photo of David, and my purse. Maggie and Tyler watched from the kitchen doorway, perhaps expecting me to apologize, to cave as I always had before. But something had fundamentally shifted inside me. The pain was still there, excruciating in its intensity, but alongside it was a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. I walked out the front door without looking back, the weight of David's memory box in my arms, the only thing that felt real. I drove through a blur of tears to Sandra's house, barely able to see the road, guided more by muscle memory than vision. When Sandra opened her door, one look at my face told her everything she needed to know. She took the box from my arms, led me to her guest room, and held me while I sobbed for my lost husband, my lost daughter, my lost home, and the years I had spent enabling behavior that had culminated in this heartbreaking moment. Later that night, as I lay awake staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, I scrolled through old photos of Maggie on my phone. Her kindergarten graduation, her first bicycle ride, the two of us baking cookies in the kitchen, she now claimed as her domain. Where had that sweet girl gone? When had she become this entitled stranger who could speak to her mother with such cruelty? More painfully, I had to acknowledge my own role in this situation. I had enabled her behavior for years, excusing her materialistic values as youthful experimentation, bailing her out of financial troubles rather than letting her face consequences, allowing her to disrespect me in small ways, until it escalated to this unimaginable point. As dawn broke, I made a decision that would test my resolve like nothing before. It was time for Maggie to learn the hardest lesson of all, that love sometimes means allowing people to face the consequences of their actions, even when it breaks your heart to do so. The morning after the confrontation, I sat in Sandra's sunny kitchen nursing a cup of tea and trying to process everything that had happened. My phone had been buzzing with text messages from Maggie since dawn, first demanding to know where I was, then confused about my silence, and finally showing the first hints of concern. "Where are you? Don't be dramatic." Mom, seriously, come home and we can talk about this. Are you okay? At least let me know you're safe. I responded only to the last one, sending a brief message. I'm safe. I need some space to think. Sandra sat across from me, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. What are you going to do now, Joyce? I took a deep breath. I need to talk to Robert. Robert Chandler had been our family attorney since David was alive. He had handled my husband's will, helped me with legal questions over the years, and had always treated me with respect, unlike many professionals who saw a widow and assumed incompetence. By 9 o'clock, I was sitting in Robert's office explaining the situation through occasional tears. He listened without interruption, making notes and nodding sympathetically. First things first, he said when I had finished. This is elder abuse, Joyce. Emotional and financial abuse. We could pursue legal action if you wanted to. I shook my head quickly. No, I don't want to take legal action against my own daughter. I need to take back control of my life. Robert nodded thoughtfully. Have you considered selling the house? The question hit me like a thunderbolt. Sell the house. The home where David and I had raised our daughter, the repository of 30 years of memories. My first instinct was absolute rejection of the idea. I couldn't possibly, I began, but then paused, truly considering it for the first time. What? What do you think it's worth now? Robert typed something into his computer and turned the screen toward me. Based on recent sales in your neighborhood, a property like yours could sell for upwards of $900,000, possibly more given the current market and the architectural features you've described. I stared at the number in shock. When David and I had purchased the house from his parents, we had paid $120,000. The neighborhood had gentrified dramatically over the decades, but I had never really thought about what that meant for the value of my home. $900,000. I repeated, trying to wrap my mind around the figure. At minimum, Robert confirmed. With the right agent and minimal updates, you could be looking at closer to $1 million. Your location is extremely desirable right now, especially with the pandemic driving people to look for homes with more space. A plan began to form in my mind, tentative at first, but quickly gaining clarity and purpose. How quickly could I sell? And is it possible to do it without Maggie and Tyler knowing? Robert leaned back in his chair, considering. Since you're the sole owner, there's no legal requirement to inform them. As for speed in this market, with the right agent and the right price point, you could have offers within days. I spent the next hour discussing options with Robert, understanding the process, the timeline, the legal considerations. By the time I left his office, I had the name of a trusted real estate agent and a plan that both terrified and exhilarated me. Lauren Matthews. The real estate agent Robert recommended met me at a coffee shop near Sandra's house that same afternoon. She was efficient, direct, and refreshingly honest. I'll be blunt, Joyce. Your house sounds like exactly what buyers are fighting over right now. If you're willing to sell it as is without making updates that might alert your daughter to your plans, we could list it quietly through my network of investors and developers before even putting it on the public market. Would that affect the price? I asked, still struggling to believe this was happening. Possibly, but not significantly. The location and original features you've described are the main selling points. I'd recommend an asking price of $950,000 and expect offers close to that, even without updates. I signed the listing agreement that day, authorizing Lauren to begin the process immediately. The next morning, she arrived at the house while Maggie was at work and Tyler was at a job interview, allowing her to take photos, measurements, and notes without their knowledge. Over the following days, I maintained minimal contact with Maggie, responding to her increasingly anxious texts with brief assurances that I was safe and thinking things through. She vacillated between anger, "You're being childish," and concern, "Please come home, I'm worried about you," never quite reaching a genuine apology. Meanwhile, Lauren worked her magic. Within 3 days, she had 5 serious inquiries from investors. By the end of the week, she called with news that made my heart race. "Joyce, I have an all-cash offer from a developer. $940,000 as is, with a flexible closing date and the option for you to remove any personal items at your convenience before they take possession." I sat down heavily on Sandra's sofa. $940,000. I echoed the figure, still seeming unreal to me. "It's an excellent offer," Lauren confirmed. "They're planning to renovate extensively and resell, so they're not concerned about current occupants or condition. They understand the situation with your daughter and are willing to handle the eviction process if necessary." That gave me pause. Eviction. That sounds so harsh. Lauren's voice softened. "I understand this is difficult, Joyce, but legally, once the house changes hands, your daughter and son-in-law would become unlawful occupants if they refuse to leave. The new owners would have the right to initiate formal eviction proceedings. It's business for them, not personal." I closed my eyes, imagining Maggie's face when she realized what had happened. The pain was acute, but so was the memory of her screaming at me to pay rent or get out of my own home. "How soon could we close?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "With an all-cash offer like this, 2 weeks, possibly less." The wheels were now in motion, unstoppable and transformative. While the sale proceeded, I used some of my savings to place a deposit on a 2-bedroom condominium in a quiet building across town. Nothing fancy, but modern, manageable, and mine. During a carefully timed visit to the house when Maggie and Tyler were out, Sandra helped me retrieve important documents, irreplaceable mementos, and enough clothing to start my new life. It felt strange, almost like burglary, to slip in and out of what was still legally my home. But the emotional connection had been severed the moment my daughter had demanded rent from me. The sale closed in record time, the funds deposited directly into my account. I signed the final papers with a mixture of grief and liberation. The house that had been the backdrop to my entire adult life, where I had loved, lost, raised a child, and finally found my strength, now belonged to someone else. I used a portion of the proceeds to pay cash for my condominium, invested a significant amount in a diversified portfolio, as Robert advised, and set aside funds for a comfortable retirement. For the first time in my life, I felt financially secure, even wealthy by my modest standards. Yet the emotional cost remained high. Each night, I looked at photos of Maggie, wondering if I was doing the right thing, if there had been another way to resolve our conflict. Sandra assured me repeatedly that I was finally standing up for myself after years of enabling behavior that had harmed both me and ultimately my daughter. "Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for people we love is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their choices," she reminded me gently. I was about to discover just how true those words were. 1 week after the closing, on a rainy Tuesday morning, my phone rang with Maggie's name flashing on the screen. It was the first call rather than text I had received from her since leaving the house. I took a deep breath and answered. "Mom," her voice was high-pitched, frantic. "There are people here at the house. They're saying we're being evicted. These people claim they bought the house. What's happening?" I had rehearsed this conversation countless times in my head, yet nothing had prepared me for the reality of it. My hand trembled as I held the phone. "The house has been sold, Maggie," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "The new owners are within their rights." A moment of stunned silence followed, then an explosion of disbelief. "What do you mean the house has been sold? You can't sell the house. Where are we supposed to go?" "I imagine you'll need to find a new place to live," I replied, working to keep my tone neutral despite the storm of emotions inside me. "The proceeds from the sale have been deposited in my account." But, that's impossible," Maggie sputtered. You can't just sell the house without telling us we live here. Actually, I can. The house was solely in my name. I was under no legal obligation to inform tenants who weren't paying rent. The words hung in the air, their implication clear. I heard Maggie's sharp intake of breath as the reality began to sink in. Mom, you can't be serious. Her voice had dropped to a whisper. This is our home. No, Maggie. It was my home. The home I invited you into when you needed help, the home where you told me to pay rent or get out. My voice cracked slightly on the last words, the pain still fresh. I didn't mean that, she cried, desperation replacing indignation. I was just upset. You can't punish us for one stupid fight. This isn't punishment, Maggie. This is a consequence. You and Tyler made it clear that you viewed the house as yours and me as an unwelcome guest. I simply accepted your perspective and removed myself from the equation. I heard shuffling. Then Tyler's voice came on the line, cold and threatening. This is illegal. We'll sue you for this. We have rights as tenants. I consulted extensively with an attorney, Tyler, I replied, finding strength I didn't know I possessed. As you weren't paying rent and had no formal lease, your legal standing is quite precarious. The new owners are willing to give you 2 weeks to find alternative accommodation, which is more than generous under the circumstances. 2 weeks? That's impossible. Where are we supposed to go? How are we supposed to afford a place with the rental market like this? His voice had lost its edge, panic replacing arrogance. I suggest you speak with your parents, I said, or perhaps consult with a financial advisor about living within your means. I heard more shuffling. Then Maggie came back on the line, now openly crying. Mom, please, we have nowhere to go. You can't do this to us. The sound of my daughter's tears nearly broke my resolve. Every maternal instinct urged me to fix this, to protect her from pain, as I had always done. But Sandra's words echoed in my mind. Sometimes love means allowing people to face consequences. I'm sorry you're hurting, Maggie, I said softly. But I didn't do this to you. This situation is the result of choices you and Tyler made, how you treated me, how you managed your finances, the values you've prioritized. But we'll be homeless, she sobbed. Is that what you want? For your own daughter to be out on the street? Of course not, I sighed. But you have options. Tyler's parents have a large home. You have friends with guest rooms. You have savings from not paying rent for months. You're both educated, capable adults who can solve this problem without my intervention. The conversation continued in this vein, cycling through Maggie's shock, anger, bargaining, and finally a kind of desperate acceptance. Tyler returned to the phone several times, his threats becoming pleas as the reality of their situation sank in. They had been living beyond their means for so long, counting on my home as their safety net, that the thought of true independence terrified them. Just tell us where you are, Maggie finally asked. We need to talk about this in person. We can figure something out together. No, Maggie. I need space right now, and you need to focus on your next steps. I suggest you start packing and making calls instead of trying to change my mind. After I ended the call, I sat shaking in my new living room, surrounded by the few possessions I had brought from my old life. Had I done the right thing? Was I a terrible mother for forcing my child to face such a harsh reality check? The doubt was overwhelming. I called Sandra, who came over immediately. She held me while I cried, reassuring me that I had taken the necessary step to break a destructive pattern. You gave her everything for years, Sandra reminded me. Now you're giving her something even more valuable, the opportunity to grow up and become self-sufficient. Over the next few days, the calls and texts from Maggie and Tyler continued evolving from angry accusations to increasingly desperate pleas for help. It emerged that Tyler's parents, tired of bailing them out financially, had refused to let them move in unless they agreed to financial counseling and strict budgeting rules, conditions they found insulting, but were quickly realizing they might have to accept. A week after the initial confrontation, Maggie called again, her voice noticeably different, smaller, more humble. "Mom, I don't know what to do," she admitted. "We've called everyone. No one has space for all our stuff and we can't afford storage plus a new place. The moving truck comes in 3 days and we don't have anywhere to go." I took a deep breath, considering my response carefully. Had been expecting this call, had prepared for it with Sandra's help. "I have a proposal," I said. "I will help you with the security deposit on a modest apartment if you and Tyler agree to 3 conditions." "Anything," Maggie said quickly. "What conditions?" "First, you both commit to financial counseling. I'll pay for 6 sessions with the advisor Robert recommends." There was a pause. "Okay, what else?" "Second, you find an apartment you can actually afford on your current income, not what you hope to make eventually. And the third condition," she sounded wary now, "you return your father's possessions, all of them, in exactly the condition they were in when you boxed them up." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought we might have been disconnected. Then I heard a sound I hadn't expected. Maggie was crying. Not the manipulative sobs from our previous conversation, but quiet, genuine tears. "I'm so sorry about Dad's things," she whispered. "I never should have touched them. I was just so angry all the time, and I took it out on you, and that wasn't fair." It wasn't a complete apology, but it was a start, a crack in the wall of entitlement she had built around herself. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a glimmer of hope that my daughter, the real Maggie, not the materialistic stranger she had become, might still be in there somewhere. "I'll text you the address where you can deliver Dad's things," I said. "And once you've found a suitable apartment, I'll transfer the security deposit directly to the landlord." Can I see you when I bring Dad's stuff?" she asked tentatively. I hesitated, not yet ready for that emotional encounter. "Not yet, Maggie. We both need more time. This isn't something we can fix with one conversation." She accepted this with a small, "Okay," that sounded more like my daughter than anything I had heard in years. As I ended the call, I realized that the pain hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed. What had been a raw, bleeding wound was now something different, still tender, but with the first signs of healing beginning to appear around the edges. I had spent decades being the mother who fixed everything, who sacrificed without complaint, who enabled without boundaries. Now, I was learning to be something else, a woman with self-respect, who could love her daughter enough to let her face the natural consequences of her actions. It was the hardest lesson either of us had ever learned, but perhaps the most important one. 6 months after selling the house, I had settled into my new life with a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. My condominium was small but bright and modern, with a balcony overlooking a community garden. I had furnished it simply but comfortably, bringing only a few cherished items from my old home and selecting new pieces that reflected my own taste, rather than decades of compromise and accommodation. I had retired from full-time nursing, using some of the house proceeds to provide financial security. I still worked part-time at a community clinic, finding fulfillment in helping others without the physical and emotional exhaustion of hospital shifts during a pandemic. I had joined a book club, started taking watercolor classes, and made new friends in my building. For the first time in my adult life, I was living according to my own preferences and priorities. Maggie and Tyler had moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a less fashionable suburb. The transition had been rocky, with much of their expensive furniture sold or stored to fit the smaller space. Tyler had eventually found employment at a smaller financial firm, though at a lower salary than his previous position. Maggie was working full-time at a department store, a job she initially considered beneath her, but had grown to appreciate for its stability and benefits. The financial counseling had been eye-opening for them. The counselor later told me, with Maggie's permission, that they had been shocked to discover the extent of their debt and the unsustainability of their previous lifestyle. They were on a strict budget, now slowly rebuilding their credit and learning to distinguish between wants and needs. Our relationship was healing, but slowly and with setbacks. We had begun with cautious text exchanges, gradually progressing to phone calls. The first time Maggie had asked about my new place, showing interest in my life rather than focusing solely on her own problems, I had felt a surge of hope that perhaps the daughter I had raised was finding her way back to her core values. 3 months after the move, I had received a handwritten letter from Maggie. Not an email or text, but an actual letter on stationery, something she had never done before. In it, she had attempted to articulate her regret for how she had treated me, acknowledging that her behavior had been entitled and hurtful. The letter wasn't perfect. There were still traces of justification and externalization of blame, but it represented genuine effort and reflection. "I never really thanked you for everything you did for me growing up," she had written. "I took it all for granted and then convinced myself I deserved more. I'm trying to understand why I became so focused on material things and status. Maybe it was losing Dad so young, maybe it was wanting to fit in with Tyler's family, or maybe I'm just naturally selfish. Whatever the reason, I'm working on it, and I want you to know that I'm sorry for how I treated you in your home." After receiving the letter, I had invited Maggie and Tyler for dinner at my condominium, our first face-to-face meeting since the day I had walked out. The evening had been awkward, but important, full of careful conversations and tentative attempts at connection. Tyler had remained somewhat resentful, but civil, clearly following Maggie's lead in rebuilding the relationship. I could see that the experience had humbled him, though perhaps not as profoundly as it had my daughter. He spoke less during dinner, his previous arrogance replaced by a quiet wariness, as if he now understood that actions had consequences, and appearances could be deceiving. Maggie had brought a small potted plant as a housewarming gift. Nothing expensive, just a simple peace lily. "I remembered how much you loved your houseplants," she had said hesitantly. "I'm sorry about what happened to your collection." It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about her emerging awareness of the many small cruelties that had accumulated during their time in my house. As the months passed, we established a new rhythm to our relationship. We didn't return to the closeness of her childhood. Too much had happened for that. But we developed something different. An adult relationship based on mutual respect rather than dependency. We had dinner together every few weeks, called regularly, and slowly rebuilt trust. I had used some of the house proceeds to establish a nursing scholarship in David's name at the local community college, a way of honoring his memory while helping others achieve their dreams. When I had announced this at a family dinner, Maggie had tears in her eyes. "Dad would have loved that," she had said softly. "He was always so proud of your nursing career." Healing wasn't linear. There were still moments of tension, old patterns that threatened to resurface, misunderstandings that required careful navigation. But there was also growth on both sides, me learning to establish and maintain boundaries, Maggie learning humility and appreciation for what she had, rather than constant striving for more. The most significant moment in our reconciliation came unexpectedly, about 6 months after the move. Maggie had asked to meet for coffee alone without Tyler. She seemed nervous as she slid a small gift box across the table to me. "I've been saving up for this," she explained as I unwrapped it. Inside was a delicate silver locket. When I opened it, I found a tiny photograph of David on one side and Maggie as a child on the other, the same photos that had been in the family album she had once deemed outdated and unnecessary. "I had them restored and reduced to fit," she explained, watching my face anxiously. "I know it doesn't make up for everything, but I wanted you to have something to replace what was lost." I fastened the locket around my neck with trembling fingers, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift and what it represented, my daughter's growing understanding of what truly matters in life. "It's perfect," I told her, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. I've been thinking a lot about what happened. Maggie said, her eyes focused on our joined hands. At first, I was so angry with you for selling the house. It felt like you had betrayed us. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized we had betrayed you first. We took your kindness for granted. We treated you like you didn't matter in your own home. I nodded, allowing her to continue without interruption. The financial counselor helped us see how unrealistic our expectations were, how we were living in a fantasy world of status and appearances. But it was losing the house that really woke me up. It made me realize that things, houses, furniture, clothes, they come and go. What matters is how we treat the people we love. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was genuine. I could see in my daughter's eyes the beginnings of the wisdom that often comes only through difficult experiences. I'm proud of you, Maggie, I said softly. Not for the locket, though it's beautiful. I'm proud of the work you're doing to understand yourself and your values. That's so much harder than buying things or maintaining appearances. I had a good teacher, she replied with a small smile. I just wasn't ready to learn the lesson until now. As we parted that day, hugging in the parking lot, with a new understanding between us, I reflected on the journey we had taken. The pain had been necessary for both of us. Sometimes love means having the courage to allow people to experience the natural consequences of their actions, even when those consequences are difficult. I had lost a house but reclaimed my self-respect. Maggie had lost material security but gained insight and maturity. We had both emerged stronger, more authentic, and ultimately closer in the ways that truly matter. Life rarely gives us the neat, happy endings we see in movies. Relationships damaged by years of unhealthy patterns don't heal overnight. But with patience, boundaries, and genuine effort on both sides, they can transform into something new and potentially stronger than before. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice that caused short-term pain but led to long-term healing? Or have you struggled with establishing boundaries with people you love? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is allow natural consequences to unfold. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, true wealth isn't measured by what you own, but by the strength and authenticity of your relationship.